Welcome to MEnbar, the podcast of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. I'm your host, Marc Owen Jones, and today we have the honor of being joined by Hamidreza Azizi, who is a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. He's also a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, the SWP, and an associate researcher at Klingendahl, the Netherlands Institute of International Relations. Hamidreza, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Hamidreza has written a new report for the Middle East Council called Iran's Shifting Discourse on Nuclear Weaponization, Bargaining Tactic or Doctrine Change. Looking forward to discussing this today, a very important and timely topic. Your paper highlights a significant change in Iran's nuclear rhetoric, particularly after October 2023. Could you explain how this shift manifests differently across various levels of Iranian leadership, from military commanders to political advisors to state media?
Yeah, of course. To give some background, the current Iranian military strategy and I could say the foundation of Iran's military doctrine is the idea of forward defense, which was formed during the war with Iraq in the 1980s. The notion is that Iran is, especially after the victory of the Islamic Revolution and establishment of the Islamic Republic, Iran is surrounded by hostile states who are either, kind of in competition, in a state of rivalry with Iran themselves, or are bases of the United States influence, and that's how they threaten the Iranian security. And this notion was kind of intensified, especially after 2011, after the US invasion of Afghanistan, and then 2003, the invasion of Iraq. So Iran found itself surrounded by the United States effectively. So to compensate for the lack of conventional kind of means of defense and deterrence, Iran started working on a few key elements as the basis of its military doctrine. So one was the network of proxies and partners in the region, which was then started to be called as the axis of resistance. And then also on missiles and later drones. So the aim was in their narrative to basically expand the geography of Iran's defense, and which would mean that basically Iran wanted to expand its so-called strategic depth, so that it could, engage with threats far from its borders before they become a challenge for Iran itself. So, long story short, what Iran started to face, especially since I would say July this year, was that different elements of this forward defense started to increasingly, being brought into question. First of all, the different members of the Iranian network, the axis of resistance, started to be significantly hit and weakened by Israel.
So
as
Hezbollah
we witnessed, first with Hamas itself, and then Hezbollah, especially also the threats more recently for against Iraq by Israel, And on the other hand, it became clear that missiles and drones also couldn't, deter Israel from directly targeting Iran, especially in this latest round of attacks. So Iran does have the capability to hit Israel. It became clear, but these elements are not enough to deter Israel or any other actors, especially if the United States also wants to come in. So the shortcomings of this approach started to become clear, and at the same time, there has been as a result of this whole trend, there has been growing talk about the necessity to revise this, to establish a sort of a strong deterrent, an effective deterrent. And the only option that is discussed in terms of what Iran has at least potentially, the capacity to develop is nuclear weapons. That's how this threat perception started to change. That's how the ineffectiveness, I would say, of the old or traditional military strategy of the Islamic Republic started to be clear. And that's the reason why we are seeing a kind of a growing emphasis in the public debate and even among the politicians on not only the possibility, but actually the necessity of building a nuclear weapon.
Right. And do you think the fall of Assad today, actually, do you think this will also factor into their changing strategic kind of perceptions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was maybe the last nail in the coffin of any hope that might have remained for Iran, that, it can, for example, through Syria, rebuild Hezbollah, and in the longer run to reestablish, maybe with adjustments, the network of the axis of resistance. But actually two very significant events since August. First, the killing of Nasrallah, and the war in Lebanon, which resulted in this significant weakening of Hezbollah. And as a result, Hezbollah, putting aside all the previous assumptions of unity of the fronts and not signing a ceasefire as long as the war in Gaza is going on. So they had to do this. So the notion of unity of the fronts, which was the cornerstone somehow of the axis of resistance, was gone at the moment. And now, so it was kind of ideological setback, I would say, to the Iranian axis. And now with the, by losing Syria, it's a geopolitical setback. So which means Iran will have a difficult time, if at all it can, basically rebuild the network. So this is the beginning of an era that I would describe as resistance without axis, because for sure we are going to see these different actors like Hamas, Hezbollah. They are still. We are going to see them as active players in their own domestic context. Probably trying to rebuild themselves one way or another to continue fighting for their cause. But the Iranian connection to this has weakened to a great extent. So there's no axis as such anymore, and that adds to all the concerns that Iran had for the past few months, I think.
Right. And I mean, I will talk about the nuclear aspect in detail in a second, but just as a point of clarification, one of the aspects of this forward defense was the missile and drone element, right?
Yes.
Do you think then that the Iranian attacks on Israel were a failure in that regard? Do you think they did not deter Israel?
I mean, if we look at the facts on the ground, they obviously didn't deter. There have been different explanations for that. For example, we know for sure that the first Iranian attack on April 13 was telegraphed, well before, and also when you look at the technical aspects of the attack, Iran had used some of its older generation of missiles and also drones, so it was mostly aimed at signaling. But the second time, of course, it was. We saw more advanced missiles and also kind of more effective ones, and they did target some intended, positions within Israel. But again, we saw that Israel hit back, this time even stronger. So in that sense, it is clear. And there's a very important reason for that. Iran has worked on this kind of, so the other name that is actually more often used in Persian is offensive defense, Okay. So Iran has worked on the active offensive elements of its military strategy while being, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say not caring about, but not having the actual capacity to effectively build, for example, Air Force, air defense, and these sorts of things. So when that aspect lags behind, regardless of how much your missiles are effective, when you are facing with an adversary like Israel, which has the full backing of the United States and other Western powers, you are automatically in a disadvantageous position, So that's why the the failure of these two elements together, the regional network and the missile and drone factor. So both of them, again, just to clarify, both of them show, actually proved effective in doing harm to the adversary, but not to the extent that it would deter them from, coming after Iran itself.
Oh, okay, yeah, I like how you put that there. So now we're talking about the nuclear deterrence, right? You talk about the latent nuclear deterrence. Is this different from Iran's existing nuclear ambitions?
It would be more or less within the same line of, basically, or whether to say in the same approach that Iran has been pursuing so far. But it's more than just enrichments.
Right.
It would be sort of Iran reaching a point that it will be considered the full threshold state, in terms of nuclear capabilities. Just to explain what I mean. There's two aspects technically when we talk about the potential development of nuclear weapons by any state. So one is enrichment, and the other one is actually the ability to effectively weaponize and militarize the program, which means you need effective command and control system. You need warheads that they can carry a nuclear, kind of weapon. You need effective and precise, and this precise is the key word here, precise delivery systems like missiles or whatever you want to use. So Iran, in terms of the first aspect, which is enrichment, Iran is quite advanced. So Iran has, according to the latest IAEA report, Iran has something around 183 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which means that if 70% or so of that could be further enriched to 90%, which is weapons grade, Iran could potentially have between 4 to 6, basically uranium needed for 4 to 6 nuclear weapons, but that's not enough.
Because you need to test them.
Exactly,
right.
You need to test them. So Iran, although of course officially they deny it, but in 2003 they stopped their research on the military aspects of it. There was a project named Ahmad, and after that they haven't worked on it. And so this is the main challenge. So they say, okay, if we want to go for full weaponization and we want to test whatever, somewhere in the process it would be detected, and we would face a preemptive attack by the United States or Israel. So the suggestion that some people make is that not to go for basically kind of open weaponization, keep the threshold status in terms of nuclear enrichment, and then start working separately on other elements, so that you would be prepared to build a nuclear bomb in a matter of weeks, for example,
right.
or a few days.
So it suggests that there's probably a team working on the detonation mechanism separate from the enrichment
which is
process.
also very problematic, but especially, given the level and depth, I would say, of Israeli penetration, intelligence penetration in Iran, when they can kill Haniya in broad daylight at the heart of Tehran, of course they can detect some elements related to weaponization as well. But, this is actually a middle way. Some experts in Iran are suggesting to kind of stay away from the negative consequences of actual weaponization, especially because even Iran's partners like Russia and China would kind of not tolerate, most probably, an actual nuclear-armed Iran. So it's a very tough position, I would say. But that's kind of reflective somehow of the current debate in Iran.
Do you think it's an inevitability that they will be able to get a nuclear weapon?
Not necessarily, because at the same time as we are seeing and hearing this debate about the necessity for weaponization, we are seeing an increasing sign of willingness to engage diplomatically. Maybe, the most recent and maybe the most evident kind of case was the latest article by Mohammad Javad Zarif, the vice president Iranian vice president for strategic affairs. He wrote in Foreign Affairs about the kind of expressing actually willingness to engage even with Trump. And this is very significant. You know why? Because after January 2020, when General Qasem Soleimani was killed, it became a taboo to speak to the United States, and that was the reason. Even why, even under Biden, they didn't talk to the United States directly. You know, so the argument by the kind of ultra-conservative / hardline faction in Iran was that we are not going to negotiate with the murderers of Soleimani. So now if they are expressing this willingness, they know that something needs to change, and they want to engage. So in that case, they can. So they are already increasing the capacity of 60% enrichment. So one possibility would be for them to use this as a bargaining tool to get sanction relief. But again, especially with the most recent developments, the fall of Assad and the kind of weakening of the, or I would say maybe the signs of disintegration of Iran's regional network, Iran already is in a disadvantageous position. And especially given the hawks in the upcoming U.S. administration, Trump, who are advocating for another maximum pressure in order to surrender Iran, not to basically, that's going to be very difficult.
I mean, it's really interesting now because obviously Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, which was meant to limit Iranian enrichment, right? But I can imagine this situation now where Trump will use the fact Iran has been weakened as evidence of his tactic working. I know Biden continued with Trump's plan, but saying that now Iran is weakened, that the U.S. will, because Trump always said we could get a quote-unquote better deal, that I wonder if the Trump administration would be willing to engage, thinking that they will come out looking like they got a better deal. Do you think that's something they would consider?
There's a lot of speculations, of course, going on. So I think on the U.S. side as well, it is quite complicated because we have Trump on one side, who has said more than once that the only thing that he wants is that Iran doesn't possess a nuclear weapon. So he has clarified again that this is the only red line that I have. And some in Iran, even from the traditional conservative camp, like Ali Larijani, the senior advisor to the supreme leader, they actually welcomed this. They said, okay, if this is your concern, we are going to talk, and then you can make sure that we are not going to have a nuclear weapon. So which means that Iran wants to, as I mentioned, to keep that threshold status. But okay, if there is a deal, we are not going to go further, but keep this as an option for the future. But the thing is that if you look at the composition of the Trump administration and also the pressure in the Congress, in other corners in DC, so it's really difficult to imagine how actually this is going to happen, And we shouldn't forget that we have an Israel that feels quite emboldened and feels that it has the upper hand. And I would imagine that even if Trump really wants to, as he has promised, not to engage in any wars abroad and to basically be a president of peace, Israel would go, for example, for another strike against Iran to push them towards some sort of state of constant tension so that the costs of engagement on the Iranian side would be so high that they could make sure that this is not going to happen.
Right.
So there's a lot of different factors here.
So for the Iranians, though, I mean, presumably their emphasis is reducing sanctions. Is that the priority, do you think, in terms of potential negotiations with?
That has always been the main priority, especially because the Iranian economy is really not doing well. For the first time after the war with Iraq, this year we had a scheduled electricity outing in Iran. Which is quite telling about the state of Iranian economy, and the Iranian government is having difficulty paying the kind of subsidies, so all this means that of course Iran feels the need to remove the sanctions. But on the other hand, I think there is an understanding, at least in some parts of the Iranian government that if there is some possibility for us to engage in some comprehensive talks for mutual, for example, security guarantees, from different actors, that could work for us. I've said this before. I say this again, that for the first time in quite a few years, in many years, Iran is really willing, or seems at least be willing, to engage in more comprehensive talks, not limited only to the nuclear option. But the thing is that the leverages that Iran had on other fronts have already diminished, if not gone already. So the question is what Iran can offer for the other parties. For example, one of the things that, for example, Trump in his first term was emphasizing on was the need for Iran to reduce its support for the proxies. So the influence is already kind of diminished. And I can imagine that the United States wants, also Europe on that matter, because of the war in Ukraine and Iranian drones and potential missiles in the hands of Russia. They want to discuss Iranian missile program as well, but I really don't see any prospect whatsoever for Iran to engage in talks on its defensive capabilities, because that's the only thing they have, So region, I would say yes. Now with less leverage, I don't know how it's going to work. Missile, no. And nuclear, for sure. They are ready to talk.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mentioned sanctions too is because you discuss economic sanctions and you say that they've created a situation where Iran is bearing sanctions as if we have nuclear weapons without actually having them. What do you mean by that? And how does this economic context influence internal debates about nuclear weaponization?
Yeah, that was actually what I quoted from an Iranian parliament member to reflect on the part of the debate actually in Iran's policy circles. Looking at it from the Iranian perspective, as you mentioned, Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program significantly to get sanctions removal. The United States pulled out of the deal in 2018. Then they started working with the Europeans, hoping that they can, provide them with something. Europe promised, couldn't deliver with this so-called INSTEX mechanism. So sanctions remained. Biden promised that he would, adopt another strategy. So delay on the Biden side, miscalculation on the Iran side, because miscalculation just, to explain a little bit, they thought that after the war in Ukraine and as a result of their partnership with Russia, they are going to have the upper hand, vis-a-vis the West. So all these things on both sides ended up in a situation that Iran sees itself, still struggling with the sanctions. So that's where this kind of argument comes from. That we actually did our best. Yeah. We did make a deal. We did, wait for Europe. So none of that happened. So why would we even need to talk again? Sanctions removal is not going to happen. So let's do what they have been sanctioning us for basically not doing.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, that makes sense now. I mean, again, with the global thing, you partly talked about this when you talked about Ukraine and Iran sending drones for supplying drones to Russia that were used to bomb Ukraine. Those those dynamics rather impacted Iran's calculus in potential negotiations about the nuclear deterrent. Are there any other issues in sort of kind of global nuclear kind of sort of world, like the AUK-US pact? Is that relevant in any way to Iran's calculus about nuclear ambitions or deterrence?
Yeah, absolutely. As I explained in that paper, although they are not primary factors, but as secondary factors, basically, and kind of points of argument for those who do support this, it gives them further justification in the sense that non-proliferation trends are already weakened in different parts of the world. Nuclear weapons are becoming more important. For example, the recent international reports about great powers already expanding their stockpile of nuclear weapons. China, for example, and then AUKUS agreement, as you mentioned, kind of which is based on some sort of a nuclear cooperation between the United States and its allies against China. So you see all these, and also, by the way, for example, the change in Russia's nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for using nuclear weapons in the face of threats. So that gives the impression, and this you can see quite clearly in the arguments of those who are in favor of nuclear weapons, that look, everybody has started to kind of re-emphasize, kind of refine. There's a process of refining the value of nuclear weapons. So this is further justification that we need to also go down this path.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's interesting how these international dynamics are all connected. I'd like you to sort of summarize. You mentioned 3 potential scenarios for Iran's nuclear future, I believe. Right. Would you be able to tell our audience what are those 3 potential scenarios?
Yeah, so it's quite in line with what we just discussed. So one would be the actual weaponization,
right.
And this is actually one of the things that most of those who are arguing for nuclear weapons in Iran are emphasizing, that even if there is one nuclear bomb that we have, but we have tested it and showed to the world that we have this, is very important. They have actually created a hashtag only single one, right. which refers to to nuclear weapons.
Right.
And so this is how they see it, the need for not only build but also test and show to the world that we have this capability. Otherwise, deterrence is not going to work. There's another, group of people who are arguing for that latent nuclear deterrence, actually, as we discussed. That's, they mentioned the potential negative consequences of actual weaponization and test. For example, what I mentioned, the potential pushback from Russia, China. Also, the possibility for Iran to be attacked, down the path in this process. And finally, the third scenario that I mentioned is sort of using this kind of advanced state of nuclear program as a leverage for talks and potential agreements with the West.
So the leverage question, this is potential for leverage. I know we touched on this, but what would Iran need? What kind of security guarantees or diplomatic concessions do you think Iran would consider sufficient in order to abandon, its non-weaponized status, right? What would it need, do you think?
It's very difficult to tell, especially given the pace of the developments these days. Yeah. Because, as I said, when we speak about the potential concessions that Iran wants, we also need to consider what Iran can give, beyond its nuclear program. Because, at the end of the day, if you want something concrete, you need to also have something concrete to offer. And we shouldn't forget that, technically, when you have reached the point you can enrich at the level of 60%, even if you dismantle, for example, get rid of this, the whole, 60% enriched uranium and remove the centrifuges, etc. You still have the knowledge and you still have the capability. As long as you have the nuclear program, you have the capability to produce it. In a matter of just look at how quickly Iran went from 20% to 60%. It was a matter of only a few weeks.
Right.
So that's why. It seems not enough for the U.S. side. But as long as Iran is concerned, as far as Iran is concerned, I think the most the main concern that they have is sort of, as I said, an emboldened Israel, which may take action against Iran's nuclear or even kind of civilian infrastructure at any moment. Of course, it's been an ongoing competition for getting the upper hand between Iran and Israel. But now I think Iran wants to make sure that the coalition, for example, an international coalition or a regional coalition against Tehran is not going to be formed, because one of the main policy goals of Trump in his first term was to basically leverage this growing Abrahamic Accord as a tool against Iran, right? So they have already started reaching out to regional countries like Saudi Arabia, others, as a kind of safety net. But I think I can imagine that some sort of guarantees that there's not going to be this kind of coalition building against Iran. This is one of the things that they want. But as I said, with the current pace of developments, it's really difficult to see how they can agree on different things. The best case scenario, I think, if both sides want an agreement, would be to start with nuclear, to settle that issue, removing at least key parts of the sanctions in exchange for Iran rolling back its nuclear program to a significant extent, and then starting about their mutual concern about, the region and beyond.
I mean, I always think the interesting thing with Iran is obviously sanctions existed before the nuclear program. So I always wonder, hypothetically, if there was no nuclear program, and now obviously there's this network for defense via Hezbollah. The sanctions have existed for so long. Is there actually incentive to remove those sanctions? I mean, the US have had sanctions on them since the revolution, right? And this is not necessarily part of the paper. I was just kind of a curious point that I sort of thought, would they actually remove sanctions even if the nuclear question was off the table?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, the JCPOA was always about the nuclear-related sanctions. Right? So there has been, a whole array of sanctions, as you mentioned, since the establishment of the Islamic Republic for human rights reasons, for other reasons, actually. But this whole system of sanctions that was built actually under Obama, mostly as a kind of leverage over Iran. That is quite significant. That alone is kind of that system. I mean, is something, and then all the other sanctions are something else. Especially when we speak about secondary sanctions. So it's not about the U.S. Imposing some sanctions, like the U.S. Companies cannot work with Iran. It's so expansive that even if a European or whatever company in the world works with Iran, they are banned from working with the United States. Right. European banks, for example, have been fined for working with Iran. And it extends even to the Iranian citizens, As an Iranian citizen, I don't know, for example, in Europe, or I have heard this even from friends in China, when you go open a bank account, those big banks who have kind of presence in the United States, who work with the United States, they are hesitant to open a bank account with you because, 1% they may think, okay, if you have some attachment to the Iranian government and then something happens, then they would be, sanctions by the United States. This is the state of affairs we are talking about. Right. No transaction whatsoever is possible from Iran and to Iran. There's no such thing as, for example, international credit cards. And even if you do have an international credit card as a non-Iranian, if you go to Iran and you start using it with the Iranian IP, it's blocked. Really? So that's the scope of the sanctions we are speaking about.
I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier because there was that European initially attempt after Trump withdrew from the JCPOA to try and obviate, to get round, to create a system, a financial system that would get around the sanctions, but that didn't work, right?
Yeah, of course it didn't work because European companies, that was exactly the reason because, so the best Europe could do, the European Union could do was to establish this system. It was based in Switzerland, if I remember correctly. I was supposed to work as a kind of conduit for money transfer for Iranian oil, for example, or other types of, for example, trade, etc. But then the problem was that European institutions, European companies, they were not ready or willing to work with Iran. So, and then Iran asking Europe, so what happened? And it was like, so they are private companies. We cannot force them to work with you. We can just only. So there was a system actually, but nobody was willing to use it. That was the problem. Because of the secondary sanctions.
The secondary sanctions, absolutely. I mean, to me, this is an example of collective punishment, almost. I think from the
absolutely,
US. Yeah,
absolutely,
I mean, it's incredibly problematic. But let's end up by looking forward, right? We've got the president like Trump, soon to be president. Well, let's just say President Trump. We talked a little bit about him, but how might, if you were to sort of talk about the future, how might Iran's nuclear strategy change under Trump or develop under Trump? What do you see happening?
It can go both ways. I mean, as I said, there's already signals from Iran and their willingness to engage. There was this alleged meeting between the Iranian envoy to the UN and Elon Musk, somehow setting the stage for. I mean, it was denied, but as far as I know, it did take place.
Kind of unusual, right?
Yeah, of course, but at least it shows that Iran is using, is creative in finding some channels.
Right. And someone is listening as well. I mean, Elon Musk in this case.
Yeah. In that sense, Iran is, because, feeling the need to remove the sanctions, feeling the need to have some, some period of peace in order to start rethinking actually its domestic and foreign policy. They are signaling this, but it depends very much on how this is going to be interpreted on the US side. Is it going to be interpreted as a positive sign that we can solve issues, or is it going to be interpreted as a sign of Iranian weakness and, now being the time for us to actually push further? And this is actually, this has already become a debate in Iran, some people are criticizing actually the government. They say you shouldn't express so clearly your readiness and openness to talk, because it can be interpreted wrongly by the other side. So if diplomacy doesn't work and Iran feels really cornered, I wouldn't rule out because if you are in a situation that economic problems are already creating challenges for the political system from within in terms of the survival of the government. And at the same time, you are facing these constant threats and rising threat perception from outside, then you would risk. If from the point of view of regime survival, if you reach a point when you think that we are going to it's going to be either a kind of gradual collapse or a potential rapid collapse, so you would go for the potential.
Of course.
At least you would try your chances.
Yeah.
So it's a very dangerous trajectory from whatever perspective we look at. But, we can just hope that both sides can stick to diplomacy.
Yeah, and exactly. And diplomacy is the hope, because as well, we haven't mentioned it and we don't necessarily need to go into detail. So there's always been a portion of people pushing for regime change in Iran, the hawks in the US, right? And some of that has been because of the nuclear program, but some of that is ideological. And I feel like some people, it doesn't, at least in my reading, some people wouldn't be happy with anything less than regime change.
Yeah, for sure. Donald Trump has made it clear, most recently during his electoral campaign, that they don't want regime change. Yeah. If you look at just his worldview and expressed priorities, he's very much against that kind of exporting democracy or whatever it was called that was pursued under George Bush, for example. But we have this whole bunch of hawks, Iran hawks, Russia hawks, China hawks in his administration, for whom the matter is which of these countries to prioritize to go for regime change, So
Right.
that could go either way, as I said,
Yeah.
and increase the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Hamidreza, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
The pleasure is mine. I think we discussed all the major issues at the moment.
Okay.
It's rapidly changing the whole situation, but I hope that by the time that people are listening to this, at least it's still valid, all this analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So Hamidreza Azizi is a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. You can read his latest report on our website. You've been listening to MEnbar. I'm your host, Marc Owen Jones. You can like us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to MEnbar, the podcast for the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.